The floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse offered a jagged, glittering view of the city, but inside, the air felt thin and clinical. Amara sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, her fingers tracing the delicate embroidery of a tiny cream-colored blanket. It was soft, smelling faintly of lavender and ivory soap, the scent of a nursery that felt far too quiet. Across the room, Darius stood by the wet bar, the amber liquid in his glass catching the moonlight. He looked every bit the grieving, doting partner, yet the way his shadow stretched across the marble floor felt predatory. "You're doing it again, Amara," Darius said, his voice a smooth, practiced caress that didn't quite reach his eyes. He walked toward her, the ice clinking against the crystal. "The doctors said the trauma of the labor, the coma, it plays tricks on the mind, stress-induced false memories. There was only Zuri, only our beautiful girl." Amara looked up, her deep brown skin pale under the recessed lighting. Her natural curls were pulled back, tight and severe. "I heard too, Darius. Before the world went black, I heard a harmony. 2 cries. One was higher, sharp like a whistle. The other was a low, steady wail." She stood, the silk of her robe hissing against her skin. "I felt 2 weights on my chest for that split second. Why is the crib in the nursery so wide? Why did I find a second car seat receipt in your email trash?" Darius didn't flinch. He set his drink down and took her hands, his grip just a fraction too firm to be comforting. "You're obsessing. You're hurting yourself. I deleted those because they were errors from the registry. I didn't want you to see them and spiral." He leaned in, his sharp jawline grazing her temple. "Don't let your grief turn into madness, baby. We have Zuri. Isn't she enough?" Amara shivered, a cold dread pooling in her stomach. He was gaslighting her with the precision of a diamond cutter. For a moment, she almost believed him, almost let the exhaustion of her recovery swallow her whole, but then her gaze drifted to the coat rack near the door. Hanging there was Darius's heavy wool overcoat, the one he'd worn to the hospital the night she was discharged. A small, rectangular shape peeked out from the pocket. When Darius turned to answer a vibrating phone on the table, his face darkening as he checked the caller ID, Amara moved. It was a silent, desperate prayer of a movement. She reached into the wool pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of plastic. It wasn't a receipt. It was a discarded hospital ID band crusted with a tiny dried smear of blood. She flattened it in her palm, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. In faded thermal ink, the blue plastic read, "Twin A, male, Cole Amara." The blood in her veins turned to ice. Twin A boy, Zion. She looked up just as Darius clicked off his phone, his charismatic mask slipping to reveal something jagged and ugly. He saw the blue plastic in her hand. The silence in the penthouse became deafening, heavy with the weight of a truth that could no longer be hidden. Darius took a slow, deliberate step toward her, the warmth completely gone from his face. "Amara," he whispered, his voice vibrating with a sudden lethal edge. "Give me the plastic." The sterile smell of the hospital didn't just linger in Amara's nostrils, it lived in her bone marrow. Every time she closed her eyes, the penthouse vanished, replaced by the rhythmic, taunting beep of a fetal monitor. The argument had started over a burner phone she'd found in her gym bag, but by the time they reached the emergency bay, the pain in her abdomen had swallowed her voice. Darius had been a phantom in the corner of the delivery room, his face a mask of practiced concern that didn't reach his frantic, calculating eyes. Amara remembered the cold sweat slicking her brow and the grip of Dr. Elise Carter's hand. "Push, Amara. One more," the doctor had urged, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. Then came the first sound, a sharp, piercing cry that cut through the haze of exhaustion. "Zuri." Amara felt the warmth of the small body briefly against her skin before the world began to tilt. The monitor's steady rhythm broke into a frantic, jagged staccato. "There's a second," Nurse Tasha whispered, her voice laced with sudden urgency. "The heart rate is dropping. We're losing him." Amara's vision blurred into a kaleidoscope of surgical lights and crimson smears. Through the fog of a failing heart, she heard it, a second cry, deeper and more resonant than the first. A son, Zion. She felt a phantom weight on her chest, a brief miraculous pressure before the darkness rushed in like a rising tide. But in that darkness, a different sound echoed. It wasn't the machines. It was Darius. His voice had been a low, jagged rasp near her ear, vibrating through her subconscious while she lay suspended in the coma. "Only one survived," he had whispered to someone, a man with a voice like gravel. "The boy is the leverage I need for the merger. Erase him. There was never a second child." Amara bolted upright in the present, the blue twin A wristband cutting into her palm. She wasn't in the hospital anymore. She was in the penthouse, and Darius was inches away, his hand outstretched for the evidence. The charismatic lover was gone, replaced by a man who looked at her like an obstacle to be cleared. "The doctors said that he died, Amara," Darius said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, reasonable tone. "You're holding on to a ghost. Give me the plastic. It's trash." "It's not trash," she breathed, her voice trembling but gaining a sudden obsidian edge. "It's his name." She backed away towards the nursery, her heart hammering, but as she reached the hallway, the heavy front door of the penthouse clicked open. Vanessa Blake stepped inside, wearing a trench coat and a smirk that didn't belong in a house of mourning. In her arms, wrapped in a blanket that matched Zuri's exactly, was a bundle that moved. Amara froze, her breath hitching in her throat as she looked at the woman who had stolen her life and the man who had sold her soul. Vanessa didn't look guilty. She looked triumphant. "Darius, honey," Vanessa said, ignoring Amara entirely. "The car is downstairs. We need to move him before the DeLucas start asking where their collateral went." The air in the penthouse curdled, turning thick with a betrayal so visceral, Amara could taste the copper of old blood in her mouth. She looked at Vanessa, the sharp features, the predatory grace, and then at the bundle in her arms. The baby didn't cry. It shifted with a quiet, restless energy that mirrored Amara's own soul. "You," Amara whispered, the word barely a breath. "You were in the room. I remember your perfume, expensive like lilies and rot." Vanessa's smirk didn't falter. She adjusted the silk blanket, the identical twin to the one Zuri was currently sleeping in the next room. "Memory is such a fickle thing, Amara, especially after a coma. You should listen to Darius. You're unwell." Darius moved then, closing the distance between them with the silent grace of a shark. He didn't reach for the wristband this time. He reached for Amara's jaw, his thumb pressing into the soft skin beneath her chin, forcing her to look at him. "This is for the best, baby. You can't handle two. Look at you. You can barely stand. Vanessa is helping me secure the merger. Zion is the key. He's a king, just like his father. He deserves a legacy, not a life in a cramped apartment with a mother who can't distinguish dreams from reality." "He's my son," Amara hissed, her eyes igniting with a cold, terrifying fire. "On paper, he doesn't exist," Darius replied, his voice a low melodic threat. "I checked the hospital servers myself. Dr. Carter is a ghost. Nurse Tasha has been relocated. There is no twin A. There is only Zuri. And if you keep screaming about a boy who isn't there, the state will decide you're an unfit mother for the girl who is." He let go of her, and the dismissal hurt worse than the grip. He turned to Vanessa, nodding towards the door. "Take him to the safe house. I'll deal with the hallucinations here." Amara watched them move, watched her son being carried away like a piece of stolen luggage. The competence she had spent years building as a woman of strategy felt like it was dissolving, but beneath the grief, a new jagged machinery was clicking into place. She wasn't the girl who would die of a broken heart. She was the woman who would burn the city to find the ashes of the man who broke it. As the door clicked shut behind Vanessa and Zion, Darius turned back to her, a chillingly calm smile returning to his face. "Now, Amara, let's go check on Zuri. We need to make sure you don't imagine anything happening to her too." He stepped towards the nursery, but Amara noticed something he hadn't. In his haste to grab his phone earlier, he'd left his private tablet unlocked on the marble counter. A map was open. A blinking red dot hovered over a location she recognized, the Pier 47 Industrial District. Her hand closed around a heavy, decorative crystal decanter on the sideboard. Her reflection in the glass was unrecognizable. The soft edges were gone, replaced by a silhouette of shadow and intent. The rain in the hospital garden was a cold, needles-sharp reminder that she was alive, even if she felt like a ghost. Amara had escaped the penthouse through the service elevator, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, Zuri clutched to her chest in a sling. She had no money, no phone, only the twin A band hidden in her bra, and the image of that blinking red dot at Pier 47 burned into her mind. She collapsed on a stone bench, the shadow of the massive oncology wing looming over her. The scent of damp earth and medicinal exhaust filled her lungs. She was a scriptwriter who had lost the plot of her own life. Darius hadn't just stolen Zion, he had erased her reality. The weeping is inefficient, a voice smooth as aged bourbon drifted through the rain. Amara bolted upright, shielding Zuri. Emerging from the gloom was a man who seemed carved from the night itself. Lorenzo De Luca didn't wear a raincoat. The water seemed to simply slide off his charcoal gray wool suit. His presence was a physical weight, dominant and still. "Who are you?" Amara's voice was a jagged blade. "If Darius sent you?" "Darius King is a bottom feeder," Renzo interrupted, his piercing eyes scanning her with the clinical precision of a predator. He stepped closer, the glow of his cigarette illuminating the faint tattoos creeping up his neck. "He is currently attempting to sell a miracle heir to the Valenti family to settle a gambling debt. A child he claims was born of a surrogate who died in labor." Amara's breath hitched. "He's my son, Zion. He stole him while I was in a coma." Renzo paused, his gaze dropping to the infant against her chest, then back to Amara's defiant, tear-streaked face. "I know. I've been watching the King account for months. But you're mistaken about one thing, Amara Cole." He took a final drag and dropped the cigarette, crushing it beneath a handmade Italian leather shoe. "Darius didn't just steal a son. He stole a child that carries De Luca blood. That boy is my nephew." The world tilted. The secret Darius had been hiding wasn't just greed, it was a lineage that invited certain death. "You want him back," Renzo stated, not as a question, but as a fact. He reached out, his hand gloved in black leather, offering it to her. "But the woman who cried on this bench can't take him. The Valentis will eat you alive. You need to become someone they fear more than the dark." Amara looked at his hand, then at the hospital windows where her records were being deleted at that very moment. She reached out, her fingers closing over the leather. "Make me that woman." Renzo's lips curved into a ghost of a smile, dark, elegant, and promise-heavy. "The training begins at dawn." But first, he glanced toward the garden gate where a black SUV had just pulled up, its headlights cutting through the fog like predatory eyes. Darius's men are already at the perimeter. The iron gates of the De Luca estate swallowed the night behind them, shutting out the city in the memory of the woman Amara used to be. Inside, the air was different, heavy with the scent of old wood, beeswax, and the cold metallic tang of unsheathed power. Renzo led her through a grand foyer where the shadows seemed to bow as he passed. He didn't offer her a room in the guest wing. He led her to a reinforced suite near his own, where a woman with a sharp gaze and a tailored suit already stood waiting. "This is Sophia," Renzo's voice dropped to a low, resonant hum. "She is my architect. She builds lives and destroys them with equal precision. From this moment, she is your shadow." Sophia's eyes raked over Amara, the damp clothes, the trembling hands, the infant clutched to her chest. "She's a mess, Lorenzo," Sophia remarked, her voice like clicking glass. "Darius didn't just steal her son, he stole her spine." Amara's head snapped up. The exhaustion that had been dragging her down sparked into a sudden incandescent rage. "He stole a part of my soul," she hissed, stepping into Sophia's personal space. "My spine is exactly where it needs to be. I just need the weapons to use it." Renzo watched the exchange, a flicker of dark approval crossing his face. He walked to a mahogany desk and opened a velvet-lined drawer, pulling out a sleek, obsidian-colored tablet and a burner phone. "Darius is moving Zion to a secure location at the pier tonight. He thinks he's invisible because he's erased your records. He thinks you're a ghost haunting a hospital wing." He leaned in close, the heat from his body radiating against Amara's cold skin. To the world, Amara Cole is a tragic headline, but to me, you are the leverage. If you want Zion back, you have to stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like a predator. You will learn the ledger of every debt Darius owes. You will know the names of the men who accepted his bribes. And then, he paused, his thumb grazing the pulse point at her wrist, you will take everything he thinks he's earned. Amara looked at the tablet, the data of Darius's crimes beginning to scroll across the screen. She looked at Zuri, who was finally sleeping in a cradle Sophia had brought in. The transition from the glass house to this gilded fortress felt like a descent into a beautiful, violent dream. "Where do we start?" Amara asked, her voice steadying into a lethal calm. Renzo handed her a dossier. The cover was embossed with the name she hated, Vanessa Blake. "We start by taking away his support," Renzo said, his eyes darkening. "By the time we're done with her, Vanessa will wish she'd stayed in the shadows. Tomorrow, you make your first appearance, not as a grieving mother, but as a queen who has come to collect a debt." Amara gripped the dossier, her knuckles white. The transformation had begun. She wasn't just a mother on the hunt, she was becoming the storm. The ballroom of the Starlight Gala was a sea of shimmering champagne and lethal smiles, but the air shifted the moment the double doors groaned open. Vanessa Blake stood near the center of the room, draped in a gold-sequined gown that screamed for attention, her hand resting possessively on Darius's arm. They were the picture of a rising power couple, surrounded by city council members and silent investors. Then the music faltered. Amara entered not with a scream, but with a silence that commanded the room. She was a vision in midnight silk, the fabric clinging to her frame like liquid shadow. Her natural curls were swept up, adorned with a diamond-encrusted headpiece that caught the light like a crown of thorns. Beside her, Lorenzo DeLuca walked with a proprietary hand at the small of her back, his presence a silent warning to anyone brave enough to stare too long. Darius choked on his drink, the color draining from his face until he looked like a wax figure melting under the heat of the chandeliers. Vanessa's smirk didn't just falter, it shattered. "Amara," Darius stammered, his voice thin, "you should be resting. The doctors said—" "The doctors said many things, Darius. Most of them were lies bought with your signature," Amara said, her voice a calm, lethal blade that carried through the sudden hush. "And Vanessa, that's a lovely necklace. It's a shame it was purchased with the kickbacks from the hospital's administrative discrepancies." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sophia, moving like a ghost through the gallery, signaled the technician. Suddenly, the massive digital screens flanking the ballroom, intended to show Darius's business projections, flickered. Instead of graphs, they displayed a leaked offshore bank ledger. Vanessa's name was highlighted in neon red, linked directly to a series of wire transfers from a known fraud shell company. "What is this?" Vanessa shrieked, her eyes darting toward the exits. "This is a fabrication. Darius, do something." But Darius was backing away, his eyes fixed on Renzo, who stood like a statue of judgment. Amara stepped closer to Vanessa, leaning in until she could smell the woman's expensive, desperate perfume. "I'm not the broken girl you left in that bed," Amara whispered, her voice for Vanessa's ears alone. "I am the ledger you forgot to balance, and tonight your credit has run out." As security approached Vanessa to escort her out for questioning regarding the fraud, Amara turned her gaze back to Darius. He looked small now, trapped between the wife he had betrayed and the man who owned the city. "One down, Darius," Amara said, her eyes cold as a shallow grave. "But we haven't even gotten to the nursery yet." The gala fell into chaos as Vanessa was led away in tears, but Amara felt nothing but a chilling clinical satisfaction. She felt Renzo's hand tighten slightly on her waist, a silent, "well done." But as the crowd parted, Amara saw a man in a nondescript suit slip a note into Darius's hand. Darius read it, and for the first time that night, a look of genuine, frantic triumph returned to his face. He looked at Amara, mouthed the word "gone," and vanished into the service hallway. The adrenaline of Vanessa's public ruin still thrummed in Amara's veins, but the sight of Darius's retreating back chilled her faster than the night air. He was a cornered rat, and cornered rats always ran to their nest. "He's heading for the records," Sophia whispered, appearing at Amara's side like a specter of vengeance. "He knows the digital trail is burnt. He's going for the only physical witness left, Nurse Tasha Green. Within minutes, they were in the back of a blacked-out sedan, cutting through the rain-slicked streets toward the outskirts of the city. Renzo sat across from them, his face a landscape of shadows. He didn't speak, he simply checked the chamber of a suppressed pistol with a rhythmic metallic click that made Amara's pulse jump. Tasha was the one who saw the second heartbeat on the monitor, Amara said, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and hope. Why didn't she speak up sooner? Fear is a powerful silencer, Sophia replied, tapping away at a decrypted laptop. Darius didn't just threaten her job, he threatened her family. But now that the DeLuca name is attached to this, she's realized that being silent is more dangerous than speaking. They arrived at a crumbling apartment complex near the docks. The scent of salt and rot hung heavy. Sophia led the way, her movements surgical. They found the unit on the third floor. The door was slightly ajar, the wood splintered. Amara pushed past them, her heart in her throat. Tasha? The small apartment was a wreck. A crib sat in the corner, empty and overturned. Tasha was huddled under a kitchen table, her eyes wide and bloodshot, clutching a folder to her chest like a shield. When she saw Amara, she let out a sob that sounded like a breaking bone. He came for it, Tasha gasped, her voice raw. Darius, I said he'd burn the building down with me in it if I didn't give him the original birth log. Amara knelt on the linoleum, her silk dress soaking up the grime. Did you give it to him? Tasha shook her head, slowly pulling a blood-stained ledger from under her sweater. I gave him the copy. I kept the original. I couldn't let him win again. Amara took the book, her fingers trembling as she flipped to the date of her labor. There in black and white was the truth Darius had been spending months trying to bury. Twin A, male, 6 pounds 4 ounces, alive. But the victory was short-lived. A sudden sharp crack of glass shattered the kitchen window. A red laser dot danced across the ledger in Amara's hand, then moved upward, settling directly on the center of her forehead. Get down, Renzo roared, lunging across the room to tackle her to the floor just as a bullet whistled through the space where her head had been a second before. The air in the grand ballroom of the King estate was suffocating, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive lies. Darius stood on the dais, a glass of vintage cristal in one hand and the stolen child in the other. Zion, wrapped in a baptismal cloth that looked like a shroud, was being presented to the city's elite as a miracle of modern medicine, the sole survivor of a tragic birth. Darius looked radiant, his charisma a polished shield. To my son, he announced, his voice booming through the speakers, a king by name and a king by blood. The applause was deafening until the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall were kicked open. Amara didn't walk in, she arrived like a reckoning. She was no longer the woman in the midnight silk of the gala. She was dressed in tactical black, her hair pulled back into a fierce utilitarian knot. Beside her, Renzo and Sophia moved with a synchronized lethal grace that silenced the room more effectively than any gunshot. The only thing king about that boy, Darius, is the man who stole him, Amara's voice rang out, amplified by the silent shock of the crowd. Darius's smile didn't just fade, it curdled. Amara, you're trespassing. Guards. The guards are currently being re-educated by the DeLuca estate, Renzo said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble as he stepped into the light. Amara marched toward the dais, her boots clicking rhythmically against the marble, a countdown to his destruction. She held the blood-stained original birth log high above her head. With a nod to Sophia, the giant projectors behind Darius flickered to life. Instead of the welcome home montage, the screens displayed the high-definition footage of the hospital corridor. The crowd gasped as they watched Darius, distinct and undeniable, handing a small, moving bundle to a man in a lab coat, while Amara lay in the background, flatlining on a monitor. You didn't just steal a child, Amara said, her eyes burning with a cold, absolute clarity. You attempted to murder the mother of your heirs. You erased a human being for a merger. Darius backed away, his heels hitting the edge of the stage. He looked down at Zion, then at the room full of people who were now recording his downfall on their phones. It was for us, Amara, for the legacy. "There is no us," she hissed, reaching the stage and extending her arms. "There is only a mother and her children. Give him to me." Darius looked at the exits, but Marco and Dante stood there, arms crossed, blockades of muscle and shadow. Trapped, Darius's face twisted into something feral. He didn't hand the baby over. He retreated toward the open balcony, the night wind whipping his silk tie. "One step, Amara," Darius croaked, his voice cracking with madness. "One step and the DeLuca legacy ends in the surf. You think you've won? You've only ensured we all lose." Amara stopped at the edge of the dais. Her heart was a frantic, trapped bird, but her face remained a mask of obsidian calm. She didn't look at the drop. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked into the eyes of the man she had once loved, the man who was now nothing more than a hollowed-out shell of greed. "You aren't a killer, Darius," she said, her voice dropping to a low, hypnotic frequency. "You're a social climber. You're a businessman, and right now you're making a very bad trade." Renzo moved in the shadows behind her, his hand hovering near his holster, but Amara raised a hand to stay him. This wasn't a mafia execution. This was a mother's reclamation. "If you jump," Amara continued, stepping forward with agonizing slowness, "you die a kidnapper and a failure. Your name will be a footnote of shame. But if you give him to me," she paused, her eyes softening just enough to offer a glimmer of a lie he could grab onto. "If you give him to me, Renzo stays his hand. You walk to the police. You keep your life. You might even see a courtroom instead of a grave." Darius looked down at the churning black water, then back at the woman who had transformed from a victim to a queen. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, broken only by the faint rhythmic cry of Zion finally waking to the cold air. The sound pierced through Darius's mania. The weight of the child, of a life he couldn't actually control, seemed to finally break his spirit. With a choked sob, he stepped back from the ledge and slumped to his knees, holding the baby out with trembling arms. Amara didn't hesitate. She crossed the distance in a blur, snatching Zion into her arms and pulling him against her heart. The heat of him, the scent of lavender and ivory soap, finally filled the void in her soul. She didn't look back as Marco and Dante swarmed Darius, pinning him to the marble in a flurry of silver handcuffs and muffled curses. Hours later, the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the DeLuca estate in shades of gold and violet. Amara stood in the nursery, the large, double-wide crib finally occupied by two shadows. Zuri and Zion lay side by side, their breathing a perfect, synchronized harmony. Renzo leaned against the doorframe, his suit jacket gone, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to reveal the ink on his forearms. He watched her with an expression that wasn't quite soft, but was undeniably loyal. "The debt is settled," he said quietly. "The Darius is in a high-security cell. Vanessa is turning state evidence to save her own skin. You are the most powerful woman in this city today, Amara." Amara turned, looking at the man who had given her the tools to hunt. She looked at her children, safe and whole. The unaware woman was gone, buried under the weight of the war she had won. "I'm not a king, Renzo," she whispered, her fingers grazing the hands of her twins. "I'm a mother, and the season for hunting, it's finally closed."